We begin with our top story on the actual people, the children suffering under Donald Trump's policy of splitting families at the border. The Trump administration has been lying about this policy and downplaying the deliberate child abuse that operates at the core. And tonight I can tell you there is newly leaked audio. This was obtained by the news outlet Pro Publica, and it reveals part of how this policy works, how it sounds as these children are split from their parents by the U.S. government. Now, when we got this in the newsroom today, we all took a little bit of a collective gasp, even though we, of course, know the facts of this thing. What you're about to hear is disturbing, even gut-wrenching. It is what no parent would ever want to imagine, and what few, I think, would want the U.S. to do deliberately to children. It is hard to listen to, and that gives you some sense of, obviously, how much harder it would be to live through. But it is part of the facts tonight. In a way, it must be heard, and because this is brand new, as I say, we just got it, it's also seems like the kind of documentary audio evidence that many in the Trump administration don't want the nation to hear. Those are the sounds of children crying for their parents in what we believe to be the first moments of their separation under these new Trump orders. And then you can hear, again, this is, we're airing it for the first time, what sounds like a U.S. border agent mocking the sounds of those children.
Bueno, aquí tenemos una orquesta.
Then a child that Pro Publica describes as 6 years old is heard struggling to understand her new reality under these orders. She asks for her aunt to come pick her up.
Vas a llegar con... Mira, ella te va a explicar y te va a ayudar. ¿Cierto?
¿Qué va a pasar con su consulado?
Papá. Con mi tía por lo menos para que después llegue mi mami.
¿Me puede abrir ahí me cerró la puerta esa?
Que me venga a traer mi tía para llevarme.
Ella llama a tu tía si tú tienes número y habla con tu tía.
Tengo el número de...
Ah, pues ahorita ella te ayuda para que hable. Cálmate nada más.
No, papá.
Voy por aquí, niña.
Papá.
Cuando saquen la...
You can, of course, hear the sounds of some of the other children crying as this 6-year-old then continues to ask if there's some way her aunt can come and get her. And she tells this agent that's detaining her that she has that phone number memorized.
Papá. Voy a llamar a mi tía para que después de comer me venga a recoger.
Cuando agarren la comida ya voy a venir para que le...
Ay, no, papá. Tengo el número yo de memoria, 34, 34.
That is just a few moments of what this Trump order sounds like in the moments it's enforced. If you think about this as a matter of humanity, that means everything you just heard is a human being. It could be your child or your friend's child or your family's child. By that standard, I think for any person, it's very hard to listen to. Who can defend this if this is what the policy sounds like? This is who.
It's very strongly the Democrats' fault. They're obstruction. They're really obstructionist, and they are obstructing. What's happening is so sad, and it can be taken care of quickly, beautifully.
They're not put in jail, of course. They're taken care of.
I'm joined tonight by Heather McGhee, president of Demos, Janet Murguria, president and CEO of Unidos US, which is one of the leading Latino civil rights groups, and Mara Gay from the New York Times editorial board. Heather, your reaction?
I mean, that audio is impossible to hear and not feel outrage and grief. I think that this is a moment, and we've known since Donald Trump came down those stairs calling Mexicans rapists and criminals, we've known that we as American citizens would be on watch, and we would have to hold the backbone and the character of this country. And I think this is one of those moments. I have been stopped in airports, contacted online. People, mostly women, need to know what to do right now. And I think that's the most important message that we can give right now, is that this is a choice that's being made by the Trump administration with the complicity of the Republican Congress. Many members who are saying we're worried about this, but it is absolutely within their power to pass a bill tonight and stop this. And there are an unprecedented number of people who are mobilizing into action. There'll be actions coming, with regularity. Families, everyday families in this country going down to the border to stand vigil and to say that this is not who we want to be. This is a moment for Americans to show what our values are, and we feel helpless, I think, is a very strong feeling that people keep communicating. I feel helpless, what can I do? But ultimately, the Congressional Switchboard should not have a moment's peace, because this is absolutely on the hands of Republicans in Washington.
You said especially women. Why do you say that?
It has been, this is a moment of awakened political activism from women all over this country, and it has been since the election of Donald Trump, since the Women's March. I'm on the board of an organization called Indivisible, which has, moved, millions of people into action. You just ask anyone, it's been predominantly women who have been, it's a record number of women running for office this year. At the same time, you listen to those tapes, you look at those pictures, you think about the thing that becomes an overarching purpose for people once they have children, or once they have any children in their lives, which is to keep them safe. And of course, the families, the women, the parents and the aunts and uncles who have already risked everything for their children to bring them to our borders and beg for asylum, the idea that all of that would be for naught as they'd been ripped from their hands, it just goes to the core, I think, of our own shared humanity. And this is a moment when people are standing up for each other. And our administration, this administration, is doing exactly what it promised. This is a white nationalist agenda. This is Stephen Miller and Jeff Sessions saying we are using this as a deterrent for more people who are not part of our vision of America coming into this country.
You say all that, and Mara, one of the reasons that the law and international human rights law has always recognized, obviously, children differently, is that they're not adults. They don't have the same responsibilities. They are more vulnerable. They're treated differently even when they do things wrong in juvenile justice, but certainly when they are innocent individuals caught up in this. And so with that in mind, I do want to play a little more of this for you to listen to, and we'll talk about how heartbreaking it is to listen to a child who, in these newly leaked tapes, obviously does not even understand that they're now in long-term detention, separated from their family. Take a listen to a little more.
Well, I'm not ashamed to admit that it made me extremely emotional earlier. It is, look, it's one of the saddest moments that we've seen in a long time. I think it says nothing about these immigrants who are coming, these children. It says a lot about us. We don't have a border crisis. I think actually what we have is a moral crisis as a country. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think we, the editorial board, we've said this before. This is just as a reminder, I mean, call Congress, register voters. I think that one of the things that the administration has done very well, and that Trump's tweets have done very well, is to create this sense of inevitability, as though no one's really in charge, and as though decisions don't matter, and that there aren't real people at stake, that this is a reality show. And I think there are a lot of Americans who know this is wrong and are deeply, feel very strongly about actually something being done about it, but they don't know what to do. And the Trump administration is relying on their inaction and on their sense of helplessness. And I think this is a really great moment to double down on civic participation and on all of the ways that, the democratic traditions that are under attack. And that's how you fight back. And that's how you fight for these children.
Janet?
Well, what you're seeing here is in that audio manifesting the policy of separating families that is immoral, inhumane, and indefensible. And despite President Trump's effort to sow confusion and to outright lie about it, he and Attorney General Sessions own this policy and own the power to end it. And we need to make that very clear. We also need to understand that what we're seeing play out here is Trump's efforts as he goes up to the Hill, as he engages Congress, really carrying out a strategy that intends to hold these children as hostage for Congress to give him what he wants, the billions of dollars for his border wall and billions more dollars to create a mass deportation force. And so obviously that is a morally bankrupt position, and we're seeing that play out. We do have the ability to push back on this. We need to make sure that Congress is held accountable in not funding these policies and holding the line on that funding.
Let me play for you, Secretary Nielsen, today for your response.
We take allegations of mistreatment seriously, and I want to stress this point. We investigate. We hold those accountable when and if it should occur. We have some of the highest detention standards in the country. Claiming these children and their parents are treated inhumanely is not true.
Your response?
Well, she also said over the weekend that children weren't being separated from their parents. And we know that that's not true. We've seen this administration try to confuse. You have the president saying it's the Democrats' fault, Sessions saying that this policy is inspired biblically, Stephen Miller saying it's supposed to be a deterrent. They're not owning this policy, but the reality is it lands squarely at their feet, and they have the power to end it, and we need to keep the public pressure.
Let me bring Heather in on that point. If Secretary Nielsen said some of these things in her next congressional hearing, she could be brought up on perjury, very likely, because there's such blatant lies, knowing lies, obvious lies, and yet their lies stacked up against the administration also saying it's a deterrent, which shows they also think this is a thing they're really doing on purpose.
We've actually heard reports for months now that they were going to do this, that they were looking for another way, a series of escalating anti-immigrant stances to activate their base, which you have to remember Donald Trump's entire campaign was really organized around this anti-immigrant rhetoric that conflates anyone who crosses the border with the kind of criminal who would be in an MS-13 gang, right? That is the rhetorical move that he makes. I do just want to say that we can do something. I mean, I think your point, Mara, was really, really great, that the part of his strategy is to make us feel like we are helpless. That's exactly what, women who have been stopping me on the street have said. We feel helpless. There's a website, familiesbelongtogether.org. That's the hashtag that's been trending nationally for almost a week now. I think later on today, there's going to be a big announcement about about a huge action that everyday Americans can take part on June 30th, because this is one of those moments, like the Muslim ban here in New York, where people just wanted to go straight to the airports. People want to go to the site of the pain and bear witness, as members of Congress have, but also just say that this is not who we want to be. And I think it's really important that we remember we do have the power, and there are great organizations helping make sure that our voices can be heard and organizing us into protest at this moment.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.